What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in with some more Destiny 2 and Lightfall news. And so in the video today we've got a few updates from Bungie, some new fixes they've introduced, updates on voting for this year's Festival of the Lost Armor, and on top of that there are some brand new emblem codes found in the Lightfall Collector's Edition. So we'll talk about how we can get our hands on those, and then we get a bit of a better look at some of the exotic armor for Lightfall, extra exotic weapon gameplay, and Bungie have outlined a series of changes to existing exotics in the game. Various weapon buffs, including for the Anarchy grenade launcher, weapon archetype tuning, and a few other things which we'll break down in the video. So, as always guys, I hope you enjoy this one, and if you do, a rating below really does help us out on the channel. But without further delay, let's get into it. And so initially, we have an update from Bungie Help here, and this is regarding reports of progress loss for players who deleted characters. And they say the issue is now resolved and only affected those who deleted a character and created a new one between the afternoon of January 30th and the weekly reset on January 31st. This issue was due to additional character deletion log capturing starting recently, and they say the logs didn't update to capture account progress for those who deleted a character, but we're currently improving our update process to prevent this issue from occurring in the future. So it didn't affect a massive number of folks, but an important update related to protecting that data in future patches. Another thing right here, but for any players who haven't received an email for the armor voting for Festival of the Lost this year, Bungie do provide a link, which I'll drop in the description box below, that allows everyone to be able to vote for their preferred armor set, whether it's the spider themed stuff or the beetle stuff. We're going to get some pretty interesting armor for the event this year, and if you haven't been able to vote, a link to do so is in the description box. Up next though, let's speak about some Lightfall stuff. And this was shared on Reddit, but Destiny Bulletin tweeted that 4 universal emblem codes have been found in the Lightfall Collector's Edition, and these emblems will be available upon the release of Lightfall. Unfortunately, we can't see what they're like until the game actually comes out, but you can see 4 different codes right there on the screen. These can be redeemed on Bungie.net, and I'll link the game post article down below with those codes as well if you want to unlock them for your account. Moving on though, we now get a better look at some of the exotic armor coming in Lightfall, so Bungie shared some new images. Initially, we have the Hunter exotic right here. Certainly a pretty grotesque looking thing close up. On top of that, there are the new boots for the Titan, which almost have these eyes set into the knees right there, which is pretty cool. And finally, also, we can see the Warlock boots right here. I think there are some pretty cool visuals on these, but give us your thoughts about them down below. On top of that, Bungie shared a new kind of short teaser for the Winterbite glaive coming in Lightfall. So we get just a little bit of additional gameplay right here. Summon Winter and freeze your foes. We see the character fire out this stasis orb right there, which sort of floats over the top of a bunch of enemies, which is freezing them as it passes. Going to be pretty fun to check this out, although I know some players have been speculating as to whether this glaive could be in the primary slot since it's a stasis weapon. However, looking at the updated press pack for Lightfall, there are some descriptions for exotics, and this says, Winterbite is a heavy slot exotic stasis glaive that fires a large ball of energy that locks onto nearby targets and freezes them. And so interestingly, actually it's a heavy weapon. Obviously there are 2 sides to that. In order for it to compete as a heavy slot weapon, it's going to have to be pretty good. But of course the other component is that a lot of players were hoping that this would be something in the kinetic slot, as that would open up other interesting possibilities. But there we have it. Give us your thoughts on the heavy glaive down below. And next, Bungie speak about weapon tuning for Lightfall in Season 20. There are a bunch of different changes from weapon archetypes, buffs, nerfs, exotic reworks, and more. So initially, Bungie say when playing on console, your reticle will turn red when it's over an enemy that's inside of your weapon's effective range, which is a useful visual aid. So this will be enabled on PC, and in a future season we'll make the colour customizable, but the red reticle is now available on PC. Up next though, we've got changes for linear fusion rifles, and they've reduced the damage versus champions, mini-bosses, bosses, and vehicles by 15%, but they say Sleeper Simulant and Queenbreaker are unaffected. So those will remain pretty good, but otherwise kind of a blanket nerf right there for linear fusion rifles in PvE. On top of this, there will be changes for machine guns, and they say we've opted to increase their base damage, which makes them more forgiving in PvP, but the buff also applies across the board in PvE, and so they've increased damage by 10%, with the following effects on time to kill against a Guardian with tier 6 resilience. So high impact frame sees time to kill reduced from 0.67 to 0.5 seconds. Rapid fire frames will go from 0.53 to 0.47. Adaptive frames are unchanged, and they also say they've increased reserve ammo by 50% at 0 inventory stat and 20% at 100 inventory stat. And they say we can take this to mean that low reserve machine guns will get a big boost, while large reserve machine guns will get a smaller boost, but reserve ammo is broadly being increased, which is positive. Next though, we have changes for heavy grenade launchers, and they're increasing the damage versus champions, mini-bosses, bosses, and vehicles by 20%, with damage to minor enemies by 40%. So that's a pretty significant buff right there for heavy grenade launchers. They're also improving projectile collision, which will make it easier to land hits. They're increasing the blast radius broadly by 1 meter. And they point out that Parasite is unaffected, as it's already very strong, but they did confirm on Twitter that the GL buff will apply to Anarchy. And so it looks like Anarchy could be back on the menu right there with a pretty significant damage buff. But bear in mind it will affect all heavy grenade launchers. And then with shotguns, they say shotgun reticles will now show the correct spread pattern, and they change in size proportional to spread angle. And for kinetic weapons, they say they've always done 5% more damage versus unshielded targets in PvE, but we want to give players more of a reason to run kinetic damage type weapons, so the primary weapon damage multiplier is increased from 1.05 to 1.1, kinetic special weapon damage multipliers are increased from 1.05 to 1.15, and kinetic slot stasis weapons no longer have the 5% damage bonus versus unshielded targets, as they were receiving the base kinetic buff. And they point out that there is a new kinetic damage type perk coming in Lightfall. And so a few interesting changes right there, guys. Give us your thoughts about them down below. And Bungie finish here by talking about exotics. And so there are a bunch of reworks coming. They say the Queenbreaker's blinding effect was underwhelming for a heavy weapon, so we've changed how it's deployed, and shots now chain to nearby enemies and use the Arc 3.0 blind. In addition to that, for Ruinous Effigy, they say the Transmutation Sphere slam attack will now suppress enemies. That's a pretty positive change. And for Leviathan's Breath, they say the buff from a few seasons back inadvertently reduced the PvP damage, enough that it could no longer one-hit kill players with their super. We fixed that, but also added Volatile and increased the damage versus champions, so it now applies Volatile on perfect draw impact. They've also increased the damage from 396 to 442, and that's inside a PvP, which allows it to one-hit kill in super. And on top of that, they've increased damage versus champions by 30%. So that one certainly is going to be worth playing around with. And on top of that, there is 1000 voices. And they say we wanted to lean even more into a chain of solar explosions by adding Scorch. And with the global heavy weapon changes, it's going to be a strong option. If you have Ember of Ashes equipped, landing a full burst on a single target will trigger an ignition immediately. And so each explosion now applies 10 plus 5 Scorch stacks when Ember of Ashes is equipped. So that's going to be pretty cool, getting some instant ignitions with 1000 voices. There are a few more right here though. They say for Sunshot, explosions on kills will now apply 10 plus 5 Scorch stacks. So there'll be a sort of incandescent effect there. Polaris Lance will also see perfect fifth shots now apply 40 plus 20 Scorch stacks instead of a custom burn. And then for Two-Tailed Fox, they say it's now the only weapon that can apply subclass verbs from multiple damage types without extra steps. And Solar Rocket now applies 60 plus 30 Scorch stacks instead of burn, and the Void Rocket already suppresses, and the Catalyst completes the trifecta. So some positive kind of verb buffs for various weapons right here. In addition, for Prometheus Lens, they've added the Incandescent perk to the Catalyst. Then with Grand Overture, the Catalyst will now provide Arc Blind. So give us your thoughts on those changes, guys. But here they say we're also starting to experiment with hipfire weapon reticles conveying more information, and we've used the Manticore as a test bed this season. You can expect to see more weapon type and exotic weapon functionality showing up in hipfire reticles in Season 21 and beyond, but they added a reticle element to the Manticore showing current stacks of anti-grav repulsor. So an interesting idea right there. And then they point out that Osmosis will work with Strand, and Elemental Capacitor now has the following effect when using a Strand subclass, and it will grant plus 20 airborne effectiveness, which is plus 25 for the enhanced version. They also say that Rewind Rounds was custom built to work with the Vault of Glass weapon set, but they're going to be applying it to more weapons in Lightfall, so it's been rebuilt to work on non-VOG weapons. They also say they're fixing a bunch of issues with Eager's Edge and a few bugs here, so it no longer deactivates when moving too quickly, but it will also deactivate correctly after a single melee swing. And then they've reduced the base lunge distance from 2 to 1.8, reduced the airborne lunge distance penalty from 25 to 20%, and the enhanced perk now increases lunge distance slightly back up to 2. And the final changes they mention right here is that they've renamed blinding grenades to disorienting grenades. And on top of that, they say Vice Stinger was one of the most desirable origin traits, to the point where it makes it hard for non-viced weapons to complete. and they say it will now reload 25% of the magazine. And so guys, lots of changes right there. I think broadly they sound pretty positive. Definitely excited for the grenade launcher buff and a lot of the exotic reworks in particular. But share your thoughts about those updates down below. And for today, that's everything we have to round up in the video. So as always, I hope this one's been enjoyable, and if it has guys, a rating down below really does help us out on the channel. Plus, if you want to see more Destiny content, feel free to get subscribed and I will keep you posted. Otherwise though, for today, as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and whatever you get up to, I hope you have an awesome day.